The first thing the racing drivers did, when they swaggered up to our post that morning, was laugh at the way Aldous Vane stood still. "Look at this one," the tall one said, loud enough for the whole forecourt to hear. "Stands in a box all day, doesn't move, doesn't breathe near as I can tell. That's a man's whole life right there." He turned to his friends and spread his arms wide the way men do when they want a crowd to laugh on cue. Slow, boring, a little toy in a tall furry hat. I was on the next plinth over, 2 strides to Aldous's right, and I felt the words land on the back of my neck like spit. "I'll tell you the truth that no one in that crowd knew. I wanted to break my post and put that man on the cobbles, but we don't move. That is the entire art of us." So I held and Aldous held, and the laughter rolled over both of us, and none of them, not one of those gleaming, famous, expensive men, had the first idea who they were laughing at. My name is Corwin Brace, and I have stood the King's post at the Aurelian Gate for 11 years. Aldous Vane came to us 6 years ago, and from the first week he was the stillest man on the wall, not the strongest, not the loudest in the guardroom where he barely spoke at all. Just the stillest, the way deep water is still, and I'd learned slowly not to mistake that for empty. That morning, the forecourt was not the forecourt we knew. The palace had thrown its great gravel apron open for a motorsport showcase, a charity spectacle for the King's Hospital Fund, and overnight the place had filled with low, snarling machines under canvas and a grandstand of folding seats, and a ribbon of barriers down the carriage drive. The cars sat in a gleaming row beneath the state windows, scarlet and silver and a green so dark it looked black until the sun caught it. And around them, like princes of a country I'd never been invited to, stood the drivers. They were celebrities, the lot of them. I knew the look without knowing the names, the tan, the watches the size of door knockers, the way a camera turned wherever they turned. The tall one, the one who'd started in on Aldous, was the headline of the whole event. A champion, a winner of famous races, a face from billboards. His teammates orbited him, and he had decided, the way bored powerful men decide, that the morning needed a target and that the silent man in the bearskin would do. "Hey, statue." He stepped closer, right up to the velvet rope that kept the public off Aldous's plinth, and rapped his knuckles on the brass stanchion. "You ever go fast? Ever in your whole gray little life? Bet you've never done 100. Bet your big day is when they let you march 12 feet to the left." Aldous looked through him. "That is the discipline. You fix your eyes on a point 1,000 miles past the man's shoulder, and you make him a part of the weather." The champion's name, I would learn within the hour, was Rurk Maddox, and Rurk Maddox was not a man who enjoyed being made into weather. "He can't even answer," Maddox announced to his friends, delighted. "That's the saddest part. They train it out of him, a whole man, and they boil him down to a hat." The friends laughed. Phones came up over the rope, a little forest of bright screens, all of them aimed at the man who wouldn't react. "Smile for them, soldier. Show the people your fast life." I have stood through worse. I have stood through a drunk screaming an inch from my chin strap, through a woman who tipped a full cup of coffee down my tunic and waited, beaming, for me to flinch. The trick is to make your stillness into a wall so high the man's voice can't get over it. But there was something about that morning that got under even my wall, and it took me a moment to name it. It was the cars. It was the snarl and the gleam and the worship of speed, all of it set up beneath the palace windows, and the way Maddox kept saying that word, slow, 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 like he'd found the one true insult, like a man who has fast in his blood and pities anyone who doesn't. He had no idea. I almost laughed standing there. He had no idea he was saying it to the wrong man. Because 6 years ago, before Aldous Vane was the stillest man on the wall, he had been something none of us talked about. We knew the shape of it the way you know a closed door is a room there, but not entered. The captain had told me once in the guardroom over cold tea that Vane had come from sport, and that I was not to ask, and that the man had asked us not to ask, and that whatever he'd walked away from it on purpose and clean. In 6 years Aldous never bragged, never let slip a single thread of it. He polished his boots, stood his post, and went home to a quiet flat, and I'd gathered a workshop full of engines he never spoke of. I'd filed him under one of those private men, with a story they keep folded in a pocket. I had no notion the story was this one, not yet, but I was about to. Maddox got bored of Aldous around 11 and went to do a lap of the carriage drive course they'd laid out, a tight, twisting thing between the barriers, more about car control than speed, a showpiece for the cameras. He came back glowing, a time on the board, his teammates clapping. And then, because the morning had not yet given him enough, he came back to our posts. "Tell you what, statue," he leaned on the rope. "I'll make you a deal. You're not allowed to talk, so nod. You ever even sat in a car like that?" He jerked his thumb at the dark green machine, the meanest of the row. "One nod. Have you ever in your slow little life sat in a real car? And here is the thing I will remember to the end of my days." Aldous Vane, who had not moved a muscle in 2 hours, who had taken every word like rain on stone, Aldous let his eyes drop, just for a heartbeat. They dropped from that 1,000-mile point, and they went to the dark green car, and they rested on it, and something crossed his face that I had never once seen there in 6 years on the wall beside him. It was not anger. It was not pride. It was the look a man gives an old friend across a room full of strangers. Then his eyes came back up to the 1,000-mile point, and he was a statue again. But I had seen it. And so, unfortunately for everyone, had a young woman near the rope with a sharp eye and a phone, who lowered the phone and frowned and tilted her head at Aldous like she was trying to place a face. Maddox didn't see any of it. "Nothing," he crowed. "Not a flicker. I rest my case." He clapped his hands once, sharp, boring, slow, boring. And he sauntered off toward the grandstand to sign things for people, trailing his court behind him, certain he'd won. I stood there with my heart going hard under all that wool, because I'd seen the look on Aldous' face, and I'd seen the young woman lower her phone, and somewhere underneath my discipline a small cold voice was saying, "They have no idea what they've started." I didn't know the half of it, but the morning was young, and the showcase had a main event still to come, and the dark green car was about to need a driver. The young woman with the sharp eye didn't leave. That was the first thing I noticed once Maddox had gone. The crowd shifted and thinned around the cars, drawn toward the grandstand where the champion was holding court, but she stayed at our rope, half a step back, studying Aldous' face the way you study a word on the tip of your tongue. She was maybe 30, in a press lanyard, a small camera around her neck instead of a phone now, and she had the patient, hungry look of someone whose whole job is recognizing what other people walk past. She caught me watching her. We're not supposed to be caught watching anyone, but I'm human under the wool, and she stepped sideways to my plinth instead, lowering her voice as if Aldous might overhear. "Your friend," she said, "how long has he been on the wall?" I gave her nothing, eyes forward. A guard at his post does not gossip about the man beside him to a stranger with a press lanyard. But she wasn't really asking me. She was thinking out loud, and she went on without an answer. "It's the way he looked at the car," she murmured. "I've covered motorsport for 9 years. You learn the look. Most people look at a car like that and they see the money or the danger or the noise. He looked at it like he knew exactly what the steering would feel like in his hands at the third barrier, like he missed it." She shook her head slowly. "Men don't fake that, and I keep thinking I've seen that jaw somewhere with a helmet under it." She drifted off toward the press tent with her brow still furrowed, and I stood there feeling the morning tilt under me. Because she'd put words to the exact thing I'd seen and never understood. Like he missed it. 6 years of the stillest man on the wall, and in one unguarded heartbeat a stranger had read the closed door for what it was. The main event was a relay. They'd built the whole charity showcase around it, a timed run of the carriage drive course, each of the celebrity drivers taking the dark green demonstration car in turn, the times posted on a big board for the hospital fund, the public buying tickets to guess who'd top it. Maddox, of course, intended to top it. He'd already topped the morning's open laps, and you could see in the way he carried himself toward the start line that the whole thing was, to him, a foregone conclusion dressed up as a contest. The cameras loved him. The grandstand loved him. He waved. And then it went wrong in the small, stupid way these things do. One of the younger drivers, showing off on his timed run, came into the tightest corner of the course. A vicious little right-hander they'd squeezed between two stone gate posts and a wall of barriers, far too hot. I heard the engine note climb where it should have dropped. I heard the tires let go, that long animal shriek of rubber giving up. And then the dark green car went sideways into the barriers with a bang that I felt in my breastbone, slewed around, and came to rest at an angle across the narrow throat of the course, one wheel folded under, steam ghosting up from the front of it. The driver climbed out shaken, waving that he was fine. The crowd made the sound crowds make, the gasp, then the relieved applause. But the car sat there crossways in the worst possible place, blocking the only line through the corner, and a low murmur of a different kind started to build, because the relay was supposed to run for 2 more hours, and the headline machine was now a wreck wedged between 2 gate posts. The organizers swarmed. I watched a knot of them argue in the middle of the course, men in branded jackets, a fire marshal, the event director with a clipboard going white at the edges. The problem, I gathered from the fragments that carried, was not just that the car was damaged. It was that the car was stuck, pinned at an angle that a recovery truck couldn't reach without dismantling 30 feet of barrier, and the showcase had royalty in the stand and cameras live and a clock running on the whole expensive afternoon. Someone needed to get into that wounded car, with its folded wheel and its bent steering, and nurse it backward off the course, through the gap between the gate posts, by hand and by feel, without putting it into the stone. And not one of the celebrity drivers would do it. I want to be fair, it's a real fear. A damaged car is an unknown thing. The steering pulls, the brakes can be soft, and threading a limping machine through a stone gap inches wider than its mirrors with the world watching is the kind of thing that ends careers if you clip a post. Maddox stood with his arms crossed and shook his head, and his teammates took their cue from him, and the young driver who'd crashed it was too rattled to sit in it again. The event director's voice climbed toward something close to panic. The clock ran. That was when I felt the man beside me move. Not much. Aldous Vane turned his head, turned it, an actual deliberate turn, the first full break of his post I had seen from him in 6 years, and he looked across the forecourt at the green car wedged in the gate posts. Then he looked at the knot of arguing men. Then he looked at me. "Brace," he said quietly, the first words he'd spoken since we'd mounted the post. "Cover the gate." "Aldous." "Cover the gate," and he stepped down off his plinth. A guard does not leave his post. It is the one law under all the other laws. But there is a clause beneath even that one, drilled into us from the first day. A guardsman may break his post on the order of a superior, or in a genuine emergency of life and safety. A car of that weight jammed loose at an angle on a slope, with a crowd 30 feet away and children in that crowd, I made the judgment in half a second, the way you're trained to a genuine emergency. I gave the smallest nod. I shifted my own stance to cover the arc of both our posts, and I let him go, and I prayed I'd read it right. He walked across that forecourt in his full ceremonial kit, the scarlet tunic, the bearskin, the white gloves, the whole improbable splendor of him, straight into the knot of branded jackets, and I saw the event director look up at this apparition and start to wave him off, no, get back, who let the costume out. And I saw Aldous say 6 words to him. I couldn't hear them across the gravel. But I watched the man's face change, as if someone had reached inside him and turned a key. He stopped waving. He went still himself. He looked at the bearskin and then at the green car and then back at the impossible figure in front of him, and his mouth opened and didn't quite close. And the woman with the press lanyard who had drifted back to the rope to watch the chaos lifted her camera, and I heard her say to no one in a voice gone suddenly tight, "No, no, it can't be him." I didn't know what she'd recognized. From my post, all I could see was a guardsman doing the one thing guardsmen never do, and an event director letting him do it. Aldous handed his rifle to a stunned footman, handed it carefully, correctly, the way you hand over a thing that matters, and then he reached up and lifted off the bearskin and set it in the footman's other arm. And for the first time in 6 years, I saw Aldous Vane on the forecourt with his head bare and the sun on his short gray hair, and he looked smaller and somehow far more dangerous, the way a sword looks smaller out of its sheath. He walked to the green car. The drivers were still standing in their loose, reluctant cluster, and I watched Maddox's face as the guardsman approached. First the sneer he'd worn all morning. Then a flicker of confusion. Why is the statue out of its box? Then, as Aldous crouched by the folded front wheel and put a white-gloved hand flat against the bodywork and tilted his head to listen to the steam, something else moved across the champion's face. The look of a man watching another man do a thing the way only an expert does it. There is no faking it and no hiding it. Maddox knew speed in his blood. He also knew, the instant he saw it, the body language of someone who had spent 10,000 hours around machines like that one. The sneer didn't vanish, but it cracked. Aldous opened the door. He looked at the cockpit, the racing seat, the harness, the small, thick wheel, the cage of it, and then he did something that made the woman with the camera let out a sound I heard from 40 feet away. He didn't climb in like a man trying a thing for the first time. He folded into that seat like a hand into an old glove. He found the belts without looking for them. His feet went to the pedals and his hands went a tentative, and his head dropped back against the rest. And he sat there for one long second with his eyes closed. And I understood, finally, all the way down, that I had stood for 6 years beside a man who had done this before, done it thousands of times, done it at a level I could not imagine, and had simply chosen never to say so. "That's a champion's seat," the woman breathed, right beside my post now, her camera forgotten in her hands. "Look at his hands on the wheel, look, you don't sit like that unless you—" She stopped. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. "I covered him years ago, before he vanished. They said he walked away at the top, won everything there was, and then just left, asterisk, didn't give a reason, didn't do the farewell tour, gone. The whole sport talked about it for a year. The slow man who once went fastest." Her voice was shaking. "And he's been standing in an asterisk box." I didn't move. I held the gate, but inside the wool my heart was going like a drum. The engine caught a low, wounded, uneven snarl, the sound of a hurt machine, and the crowd hushed in a great rolling wave, the way they hush for the dangerous moment at a circus. Aldous didn't gun it. That was the first thing I noticed, and the woman noticed it too because she made a small approving sound. A lesser hand would have wrestled the wreck, fought the bent steering, shoved it. Aldous listened to it. He let it idle, feeling the pull through the wheel, learning in 5 seconds exactly how the crash had changed the car, where it wanted to go, where it would fight him, how much of the front end he'd lost. Then, so gently it looked like nothing at all, he began to move it. Backward, inch by inch, the folded wheel scraping and juddering. The whole car canted on its broken corner, and the gap between the 2 stone gateposts ahead of him no wider than a held breath. One mistake, one twitch too much on a steering rack that no longer told the truth, and he'd put a charity car worth more than my house into a 400-year-old gatepost in front of the king and 40 cameras. He didn't twitch. He read the car the way I'd seen him read a crowd for 6 years, the way he'd read the runaway quiet of the guardroom, total stillness on the outside, total attention underneath. The car crept back. The marshals had frozen. The drivers had frozen. Even Maddox had uncrossed his arms. The left mirror passed the gatepost with perhaps an inch to spare. The right mirror cleared the other post. There was a horrible scrape as the folded wheel dragged over the lip of the course edge. And then the green car was through the gap, clear of the throat of the corner, sitting safe and crooked on the open gravel beyond, steam still rising, no longer blocking anything, no longer a danger to anyone. The crowd did not cheer right away. That's how I knew it had been real. A trick gets a cheer. A near thing that could have gone wrong gets a held breath, and then, only when the breath finally lets go, the sound. The sound came late, and it came loud, and it rolled across the forecourt and up the face of the palace, and somewhere up in the state windows I am told a figure had been standing watching the whole thing, but I'll come to that. Aldous switched the engine off. The wounded snarl died. He sat for a moment in the sudden quiet, and then he unfolded out of the seat, and the white gloves were filthy now, smeared with oil and gravel dust, and somehow that was the most extraordinary thing of all. A king's guardsman in his scarlet with his bare gray head and his ruined white gloves, standing beside a car he just saved with hands that knew exactly how. The event director got to him first, talking fast, gripping his arm. The marshals converged, and the woman with the camera was crying openly, the way people do when something old and lost surfaces in front of them without warning. "He came back," she kept saying. "After all this time, and nobody knew where he went, and he's been asterisk here." Maddox crossed the gravel. The whole forecourt watched him do it. He'd spent the morning making the silent guardsman into a joke for the cameras, and now the cameras turned to follow him toward the man, and you could see him feel the ground shift under his expensive shoes with every step. He stopped in front of Aldous, and for the first time all day, the famous champion did not seem to know what his face was supposed to do. Maddox started, stopped, looked at the green car, the gap, the gateposts, the oil on the white gloves. "That corner, nobody else would touch it, I wouldn't touch it." He swallowed. "Who are you?" Aldous Vane looked at him for a long moment. And here is what I had braced for, what I think the whole forecourt had braced for, the line that ends a man. The cold, perfect sentence that would take Rourke Maddox's morning of mockery and feed it back to him in front of every camera he owned. Aldous had earned that line. He had it loaded. I could see it in the set of his jaw. The slow, boring statue could have leveled the great champion with a single true sentence, and we would all have cheered. He didn't fire it. "I'm the man at the gate," Aldous said quietly. "That's all I am now." And he picked up his bearskin from the footman's arm, and he settled it back on his bare gray head, and he took back his rifle, and he turned to walk back to his post, back to the box, back to the still, slow life that Maddox had spent the whole morning laughing at, as if none of it had happened, as if he had not just done the one thing none of them would. It was the event director who couldn't let it lie. Maybe he thought he was being kind. Maybe he just couldn't bear for the cameras to lose the story. He caught Aldous' sleeve and said, too loud in a voice that carried to the grandstand and the press tent and the live feed, Wait, everyone should know. This man, do you know who this is? I checked the registration on the car, the demonstration car, the green one. It's registered to the palace collection now. It's a heritage machine. And the placard on it," he was babbling, gesturing back toward the row of cars under the state windows. "The placard. Go and read the placard on the green car. Just go and read it." People went. That's the thing about a crowd. Give it a small mystery and it will move as one. A dozen of them, then 50, drifted to the row of gleaming machines and clustered around the dark green car's display board, the little brass and glass placard the palace had set beside it for the showcase, and I watched the woman with the camera reach it first and go absolutely still. I learned later what it said. It said the car was a heritage racing machine, on loan to the King's Hospital Fund, driven to its most famous victory by the last man to win the great championship before he stepped away from the sport at the height of his powers. And it gave that man's racing name. And then, in smaller letters, because the palace keeps careful records of its own, it noted that the same man now served in the household division, that he had, 6 years earlier, quietly asked to be allowed to trade the circuit for the post, and that the request had been granted, and that his old champion's wheel had been donated to the very collection that now stood under the state windows of the house he guarded. The slow man who once went fastest, He hadn't hidden in the box. He'd come home to it. The woman turned from the placard with her hand over her mouth and found Maddox in the crowd, and she didn't even mean it cruelly, I think. She was just a journalist who'd finally placed the face. "Rourke," she said into the live cameras, "you spent all morning calling him slow. He has more championships than you'll win in your whole career. He's the one they still talk about. He's the one asterisk you talk about." She lowered her hand. "And he walked away from all of it to go and stand quietly in a box and never once tell anyone. Do you understand what you've been laughing at? I have stood through a great many reversals on that forecourt. I have watched the arrogant get what's coming, but I had never watched a man get humbled by asterisk silence before, because Aldous never said a word in his own defense, never claimed a thing, never corrected a single one of the insults. He just turned out to be exactly the opposite of every word that had been thrown at him, and the truth of it landed on Maddox with no help from anyone. The champion stood in the middle of the gravel with 50 phones on him and the placard's brass letters reflecting the sun, and the whole architecture of his morning, the swagger, the asterisk slow asterisk, the boring asterisk, the toy in the furry hat, collapsed under him in real time, and there was nowhere for any of it to go. To his credit, and I did not expect to be able to say this, he didn't bluster. He didn't laugh it off or stalk away. He walked slowly, the whole length of that watching forecourt, to where Aldous had nearly reached his plinth, and he stopped a respectful 3 steps back. The way you stop short of a thing you finally understood is bigger than you. And in front of every camera he had spent the morning performing for, Rourke Maddox took off his sunglasses, which I think for a man like that is most of the way to taking off his armor, and he said, "I'm sorry, I didn't." He stopped, started again, simpler. "I didn't know who I was talking to. I should have shown respect to a man at his post no matter who he was. That part's on me whether you'd won a thing or not." He glanced back at the green car, the gap, the gate posts. "What you just did in that car. I've been racing my whole life and I couldn't have done it, so." He straightened, and he did a thing I'd never have believed of him 3 hours earlier. He put his heels together, and a champion of the world gave a clumsy, sincere, entirely unchoreographed little bow to a guardsman in a bearskin. An honor, genuinely. Aldous Vane received it the way he received everything, without expression, eyes already returning to the 1,000-mile point past Maddox's shoulder. But I was 2 strides away, and I had stood beside the man for 6 years, and I saw the corner of his mouth move. Just the corner. Just once. It was the most I had ever seen Aldous Vane smile, and it was for the man who'd called him slow, and I think that was the whole point of who he was. He stepped up onto his plinth. He brought his rifle to the slope. He fixed his eyes forward and became, once more, the stillest man on the wall, oil on his white gloves, the crowd in an uproar of cameras and questions in front of him, and not one flicker on his face to say that anything at all had occurred. But it wasn't over, because up in the state windows, the figure who had watched the whole thing from the first scrape of rubber to the last clumsy bow had seen something that mattered to him. And the palace, it turned out, was not going to let the moment pass the way Aldous wanted it to. A page came down within the hour. I saw him cross the forecourt at the half-run that pages do when they're carrying word from above, and he went to our captain of the watch, who was standing grim near the press tent trying to decide how angry he was supposed to be that a guardsman had broken his post and driven a racing car in front of the entire nation. The page said something. The captain's face went through 3 weathers in a row and came out somewhere I'd never seen it. Then the captain came to us. "Vane." He stood at the foot of the plinth, and he kept his voice low for us and not for the cameras. "You left your post." "I did, sir," said Aldous, eyes forward. "In a genuine emergency of safety by my reading, with guardsman brace covering your arc." The captain glanced at me, and I confirmed it with the smallest nod, my heart in my throat. "That is the clause. That is exactly the clause." He let a breath go. "I'll be writing it up that way because that is the truth of it, and any man who says different can come and explain to me why a charity car loose on a slope 30 feet from children was not an emergency." He paused. "But that's not why I'm here. He stepped closer. His Majesty was at the window, the captain said quietly. The whole of it. He's asked that you attend him this evening after the post stands down, not a reprimand vain. Something almost like warmth moved under the captain's mustache. He says his words, which I'm to give you exactly. He says he has had a champion guarding his door for 6 years and was never told, and he would like to shake the hand that no one mentioned. And he says the wheel in the collection should not be the only thing of yours the house honors. For the first time, Aldous Vane's eyes left the 1,000-mile point of their own accord and came down and rested on the captain's face. He didn't speak, but I saw his throat work once, and I understood that whatever this stoic, vanished, deliberately forgotten man had been bracing against for 6 years on the wall, it had not been the mockery. It had never been the mockery. He could take the mockery in his sleep. What he had not been ready for, what nearly undid him there on the plinth, was to be seen and honored and welcomed home by the house he'd come quietly to serve. "Tell His Majesty," Aldous said, and his voice was rougher than I'd ever heard it, "that it would be my honor, and that the gate is well covered while I am away." The captain almost smiled. "It is," he said with a look at me. "Stand easy, Vane, as easy as you ever do," and he went. The showcase ran its course. The relay was rerun on a shortened track once the green car was wheeled clear. The hospital fund had its record day, helped considerably by the footage of a King's Guardsman saving the headline machine, which by sundown had been watched more times than I can comfortably think about. The woman with the camera filed her story, a good one, a kind one, I'm told, that did not crow over Maddox but stood in honest wonder at a man who had laid down a crown of speed to take up a post of silence, and asked, gently, what kind of man chooses that? The slow man who once went fastest. The whole country was saying it by nightfall, and not one of them meant it as an insult anymore. Maddox stayed. That surprised me most of all. When the cameras had gone and the grandstand was breaking down and the long blue evening came over the forecourt, the champion was still there, sitting on a barrier near the green car, looking at it. I'd come off post by then, my relief had mounted, and I'll admit I drifted over, half to make sure he wasn't there to cause more trouble, and half out of plain curiosity. "He really won't tell anyone what it was like, will he?" Maddox said, not looking up. 6 years and his own guardroom didn't know. "No," I said, "he won't." "I keep thinking about it." Maddox turned the sunglasses over in his hands. "I've spent 20 years making sure everyone knows exactly how fast I am. Sponsors, cameras, the lot. And he had more than I'll ever have, and he gestured at the bearskin line, the gate, the still red figures down the wall. He just put it down and went and stood somewhere it didn't matter. And he never told a soul, even when I was standing there calling him slow to his face. Especially then." He shook his head slowly. "I don't think I understand it, but I think I respect it more than anything I've ever done." I didn't have a speech for him. I'm a guardsman, not a philosopher. But I'd stood beside Aldous Vane for 6 years, and I found I had one true thing to offer. "He told me once," I said, "the only time he ever said anything close to it, he said that going fast was the easiest thing in the world, that any fool with nerve can go fast. He said the hard thing, the thing it took him his whole career to learn, was learning when not asterisk to move, when to hold the line and let the moment come to you instead of chasing it. I watched the last of the light leave the state windows. I think the post is the same lesson. I think he came here because it's the purest way left to him, to practice the one thing he found out actually mattered." Maddox was quiet for a long while. Then he stood, and he put the sunglasses in his pocket where they belonged, and he looked down the wall at the silent figures one more time. "Tell him," he said, "that the bow was real, and that the slow man is the fastest learner I've met in 20 years. A breath. And tell him I'm sorry again, from a man who should have known better than to judge a stillness he couldn't read." I told Aldous all of it the next morning in the guardroom, over cold tea, the way the captain had once told me the little he knew. Aldous listened with his hands around the cup and that closed-door face I'd misread for 6 years and would never misread again. When I finished, he didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "He's not a bad driver, Maddox, he's a frightened one. He goes fast because he's afraid of what he'll have to feel if he ever sits still." He turned the cup. "I was that once, faster than him, more frightened than him." A pause. "The post cured me, so I stayed." That was the most Aldous Vane ever told me about where he'd come from, and it was more than the placard, and more than the wheel in the collection, and more than the championships the whole country was reciting by then. The post cured me, so I stayed. I have thought about that more times than I can count, standing my own post in the small gray hours when the forecourt is empty and the cold gets into the wool, and a man has nothing to do but hold the line and let the night come to him. He went to the king that evening as ordered, and what passed between them stayed between them as it should. He came back to the wall the next day, and the day after that, and 1,000 days after that, exactly the same, the stillest man on the wall, the oil long scrubbed from his white gloves, no medal added to the row on his chest that anyone could see, because the honor a man like that values doesn't hang where the cameras can find it. The tourists came and went and laughed at the statue who wouldn't move, and never knew, and Aldous never told them, and that was how he wanted it. But I knew, and now, when some loud, bright, certain man leans over the rope and calls one of us slow, calls us boring, calls us a toy in a tall furry hat, I no longer want to put him on the cobbles. I just hold my post, and I let the words wash over the wall the way Aldous taught me without ever once meaning to teach me, and I think about the green car threading the gap between the gateposts with an inch to spare, and the corner of a mouth that moved just once. Because the stillest man I ever served beside was the fastest man in the world, and he gave it up on purpose, and he never said a word, and that, I have come to understand, is not the absence of speed. It is the highest form of it,